Good morning and welcome. We are excited to have everyone here to celebrate an unsung hero. And we are going to start off our morning with the WVSDB Tapestry performing our school song. Thank you, and we want to thank our directors, Mr. Josh Haza and Mr. Barry Nealis. Well, that's... Okay. I'd like to welcome some of our speakers, Mayor Cadle, Ms. Luann Smith, and Pastor Rob Vaughn for joining us. We'd also like to welcome those attending by Facebook. In particular, one of Marlin Lane Rankin's relatives, Miss Margie Lane Barnett, and her husband, Otis Barnett. Ms. Barnett is a third cousin, well, once removed from Mr. Rankin, and we are very excited to have them joining us from Ohio on Facebook. Pastor Rob Vaughn is going to share a few words next.
Good morning. It is my great honor to be invited to be here today. The congregation I serve, the Romney Presbyterian Church, has a long history of relationship with the West Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind, beginning, in fact, before the establishment of the school, as it was a former pastor of the congregation who established the Potomac Academy, who then donated this campus to the state for the establishment of the school. I am here as well because one of the many hats that Mr. Rankin wore was as a Presbyterian minister, and while he never served my congregation as pastor, he was a recurring guest speaker there when he happened to be traveling through Hampshire County. So I am thrilled to be a continuing piece of that history. And with that, let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather today in memory and honor of your servant, the Reverend Marlin Lane Rankin. We ask that this day and as we leave this space, we may honor his memory not only in remembering his name and in naming this location, but also that you may help us as you helped him use our faith in the service of justice, giving voices to those silenced, and freedom to the oppressed. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Up next, we're going to have the pilot of the day, I will say. Ms. Luann Smith has been a driving force in recognizing Romney as a very significant player in getting women the right to vote in the entire United States. So Romney is a very tiny town over here on the Eastern Panhandle, but we have some very significant players, and Ms. Luann Smith is going to give you some of that background.
Good morning. My speech is entitled Marlin Lane Rankin and the Battle for the 19th Amendment, and it's stated between February 27th through March 11th, 1920. There are many heroes in West Virginia's battle to ratify the 19th Amendment, which would gain women the right to vote under the U.S. Constitution. And one of those heroes was Marlin Lane Rankin, an alumnus of the West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and the Blind, who we are honoring here today. Delegate Rankin was a member of the 1920 West Virginia House of Delegates when Governor John Jacob Cornwell of Romney, another of the heroes in this story, called for a special session to address ratification, that's approval, of the 19th Amendment. The governor, Delegate Rankin, and Romney's State Senator Garnett K Kump became heroes when facing a strong opposition led by Delegate J. Sloan Kirkendall, also of Romney. Without Kirkendall's deciding to surreptitiously join the other side, West Virginia would likely have easily ratified the amendment, perhaps with a unanimous vote. It is not easy gaining the approval of federal amendments. After 2/3 of the members of both houses of the U.S. Congress approve, it is then up to 3/4 of the state legislatures to ratify the amendment with a majority vote. In 1920, that was 36 of the then 48 states. If West Virginia ratified, it would be number 34 out of the 36 states needed. Otherwise, 3 more states would have been required out of the 9 remaining that had yet to address ratification. At the time, the prevailing belief was that it didn't matter whether West Virginia ratified, as there were at least 3 other states that would do so, and probably by the end of March, at least that was the belief. What people did not realize then was that the well-funded, unscrupulous opposition was fully gearing up, and the lessons it learned in the battle for West Virginia almost propelled them to victory. Ultimately, there would not have been 3 more states to ratify if West Virginia had failed to do so, making West Virginia a state that had to be won for women throughout America to gain the right to vote in 1920. All signs were pointing to an easy, perhaps unanimous vote in the West Virginia legislature, as was seen in many states that addressed ratification before West Virginia's vote. This was because both major political parties and their leaders supported the federal amendment, because Democratic Governor John Jacob Cornwell was a strong supporter and could be expected to elicit the support of members of his party, and because prior to West Virginia, every state that had a Republican legislature strongly supported the 19th Amendment. In West Virginia, 23 of 29 state senators and 67 of the 89 state delegates participating in the special session were Republican, which should have made this a sure thing. Additionally, polling prior to the governor's call for the special session on February 20th was also very much in favor of the amendment, but suffragists, supporters of the right to vote, who had been surveying members upon their arrival in Charleston for the session start on February 27th, were alarmed to learn there had been a major shift in support. Instead of the members agreeing with the simple justice argument that won over many state legislatures because of the important role played by women in support of World War I, and apparently orchestrated remarks, many chose to cite a failed referendum in 1916, held prior to the war, when their constituents voted overwhelmingly against a woman's right to vote. That statewide vote was 73% against and 84% against in Hampshire County. So while it was initially thought that there would be no way for West Virginia to lose this ratification battle, it almost did, winning by just one vote in the state Senate and by just 3 votes in the House of Delegates. And that was prior to two votes being changed to yes to allow a reconsideration vote later in that session. What happened to cause this shift in support? As they did in the remaining states that had yet to address ratification, the well-funded opposition sought out clever, ambitious political leaders who could sway support to their side. The perfect candidate was Delegate J. Sloan Kirkendall of Romney, who had the political savvy and connections needed, including close ties with his Democratic Party leader and Romney neighbor, Governor John Jacob Cornwell. And early in the special session, he quickly showed that he was willing to use those ties in an unethical manner. When Governor Cornwell called for the special session, he had just several items on the agenda, as he had the goal of it being over by the time the voter registrars would meet on March 4th to work on the logistics for dealing with the state's primary elections and for the possible inclusion of women voters. Only those bills called for by the governor are allowed in special sessions, and any additional bills coming forward would not have been acceptable to the governor. Yet Delegate Kirkendall brazenly got his bill, which was essentially a repeat of the failed 1916 referendum, to be placed on the agenda. He was insisting to the House Speaker that the governor wouldn't mind this addition. By believing Kirkendall was a close ally of the governor and understood his wishes, the Speaker approved this, what should have been an unauthorized addition, which opened the door to other such bills in that special session, each jeopardizing passage of the 19th Amendment. Kirkendall's action to introduce his bill also likely caused Democratic members to question whether the governor fully supported the federal amendment, and this enabled some to change their support. Fortunately, Delegate Rankin was able to prevent one of those bills from advancing on March 4th by his alertly demanding a vote, which resulted in its failure. But the opposition lost by just one vote, and the longer the session continued, the opposition had more opportunities to work on changing the minds of legislators, either by gentle persuasion or by other means. Delegate Kirkendall was involved in one of those attempts to change minds when he orchestrated a protest meeting in Romney on March 6th to demand that Senator Garnett K. Kump change his vote to no. Senator Kump, again one of the heroes of this story, refused to do so. But if he or any other member of the state Senate had caved to such pressure being exerted during that final week of the special session, it would have resulted in the defeat of the amendment. Just one vote changing to no would have prevented passage of the 19th Amendment. It was a tough battle, fighting such a determined and capable foe, but fortunately Delegate Marlin Lane Rankin chose to stand up for a woman's right to vote, and his actions may have saved the day for passage of the amendment. In addition to Delegate Rankin's alert support of the leadership team to stymie the opposition, there were 2 key things Delegate Rankin did that helped counter the opposition. The first was undermining the belief that it didn't matter whether West Virginia or the legislators chose to support the amendment. This was crucial because those who thought it didn't matter could easily shift sides to vote against the amendment. Delegate Rankin, who is also a minister in the Presbyterian Church, was a true believer in the rightness of the cause, having run for office in 1918 when a woman's right to vote was his main plank in his candidacy. and he likely addressed the 19th Amendment and the 5 opening prayers given during key junctures, including the opening day of that special session, just as he had done in Delaware, where he was honored to be invited to give the opening day prayer at their special session later that month. His powerful, eloquent speaking ability and genuine support for the cause likely persuaded wavering delegates that their vote did matter, and their voting yes was morally the right thing to do. The second thing he did was undermine the excuse that legislators would be supporting the will of their constituents by voting no. He effectively did this on March 8th, when the opposition appeared to be gaining momentum for reversing the House of Delegates' March 3rd vote in favor of the amendment. The opposition had a well-respected former Speaker of the House give what some might consider the closing arguments for opposing the amendment, and this lengthy speech could have provided the excuse for wavering delegates who were pressured to change their votes to drop their support. But it was followed by Delegate Marlin Lane Rankin, who gave his remarks, unfortunately not reported in the journal for the special session. And he had the clerk read a powerful letter by West Virginia's U.S. Senator Davis Elkins. The senator gave his views on the importance of ratification and indicated that in his 1918 race for the U.S. Senate, which centered on women's right to vote, he had amassed a convincing margin for victory. This was nearly 30,000 votes, as Delegate Rankin indicated when he spoke to the press in Delaware later that month. This proved that the 1916 failed referendum was no longer representative of the will of the West Virginia voters, destroying the most effective argument and excuse of the opposition. Delegate Rankin's timely remarks were likely crucial for preventing an attempted early adjournment in the House of Delegates, voted on later that day, which would have resulted in West Virginia failing to ratify the 19th Amendment. When you consider that motion lost by just 3 votes, imagine what could have happened had Delegate Rankin chosen not to speak on behalf of and gaining the right to vote. There are so many ups and downs in this ratification battle that are too numerous to mention. But knowing how strong the opposition was and its willingness to use unethical means to achieve their ends during this very long special session, some could term West Virginia's ratification a miracle. Again, on March 10th, 1920, it won by just 1 vote in what has been termed West Virginia's most dramatic legislative session. It truly became a battle of right versus wrong, and that's the battle when Reverend Marlin Lane Rankin became a true hero for a women's right to vote. And in closing, I'd like to thank Jane Ailes for her contributions to this presentation. So that's the story. Thank you very much.
You have a chance to talk with her. There are so many little tiny stories that all lead up to this vote and afterwards that are just fascinating, and it's well worth your time if you can catch her to learn more about that. Next up, we have a special message from Senator Joe Manchin.
Hello, I'm United States Senator Joe Manchin. I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this year's celebration to commemorate the anniversary of the 19th Amendment. The West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and Blind hold a special place in my heart, and I am happy to lend my voice of support for this event. Marlin Lane Rankin's remarkable impact on our beloved home state and country was recently brought to light. Delegate Rankin was influential in shaping the history of women's suffrage, and thanks in part to his work, on August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment took effect and forever changed the trajectory of American society. Today's celebration reminds us that opportunities for well-rounded and balanced lives should be granted to all, including our young people. Being blind did not deter Delegate Rankin from initiating great change. We must encourage this type of ambition and confidence in the next generation so they can accomplish whatever they set out to do. Overcoming struggles in life requires ambition, stamina, and strength, which is much easier said than done. We must recognize that each student has the overwhelming potential to succeed in an uncertain future. The teachers, faculty, and supporters of this establishment are known for instilling a sense of drive in their students, a drive that is often inspired by people like Delegate Rankin. Their steadfast commitment to education is admirable. I'd like to recognize Luann Smith, Melanie Hess, Nancy Judd, Superintendent Clayton Birch, and everyone at the Schools for the Deaf and Blind who have worked hard to make today's event such a success. To the students, our entire statewide community wants you to succeed. I encourage you all to center your education around your goals and ambitions so that you can live the independent, fruitful, and happy lives you deserve. I'm incredibly proud of all that the Schools for the Deaf and Blind have achieved and what they will undoubtedly continue to accomplish moving forward. Thank you. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the great state of West Virginia.
Next up, we will have Romney Mayor, Miss Beverly Cadle, is going to read a proclamation to commemorate this day. In the proclamation, there are some more details regarding the event and the vote that are crucial to us as women now having the ability to vote however we see fit.
Thank you. It's great to be here this morning to celebrate Marlin Lane Rankin. And before I start with the proclamations, every paragraph starts with a whereas. And I think that interrupts the story. So I'm going to dispense with the whereases this morning and just try to tell you the story. Some of it will be a slight repeat of what Luann gave you, but if it is a repeat, it's something worth repeating. So, proclamation recognizing Marlin Lane Rankin. Whereas, first one, politicians from the town of Romney or having a close affiliation with the town, such as Marlin Lane Rankin, played a central role for women gaining the right to vote in 1920. And Delegate Marlin Lane Rankin, as an alumnus of the West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and Blind in Romney, served in the House of Delegates February 27th to March the 11th in the special session of the legislature called by Governor John Jacob Cornwell, another Romney resident, to ratify the 19th Amendment. Supporters of the ratification in the House of Delegates faced a well-led, well-funded, highly unethical, and extremely motivated opposition that at times looked like they would succeed. And it took an exceptionally strong team to prevent the opposition's efforts from succeeding. It was then that Delegate and Reverend Marlin Lane Rankin played an indispensable role. The opposition bombarded the House of Delegates with multiple bills and motions, as Luann mentioned, that needed to be quickly countered. Delegate Rankin actively engaged with the leadership team to stymie these efforts. He demanded a crucial vote to oppose a bill that would have undermined the passage of the 19th Amendment, and because of him, that bill failed. When it looked like the opposition was making headway with those who had voted for the amendment to get them to change their votes, Delegate Rankin presented compelling arguments for its passage after a lengthy speech by a well-respected opposition. And this may have prevented the opposition from gaining the sufficient votes needed to adjourn the session, which would have ended the bill in 1920. Had the session adjourned then, prior to the arrival of the state senator to break the 14-14 tie, this would have killed the ratification in West Virginia as well as throughout the United States, as West Virginia had to be won for the 19th Amendment to succeed in 1920. Rankin was also a minister in the Presbyterian Church. He was given the honor of presenting the opening prayer on 5 occasions during that special session, and since that was limited, that was quite a feat that he had led the delegation in prayer 5 different times, including the opening day prayer. It is likely that he used this opportunity to advocate for the 19th Amendment and to persuade wavering members in the legislature to the rightness of the cause he wholeheartedly supported. Reverend Rankin served in this role exceptionally well, as evidenced by his being invited to present the opening day prayer in the State House at Delaware in their special session later that month. And yes, he did bring up voting rights during that prayer, it evidenced in the Delaware press. An eloquent speaker, Reverend Rankin was a force to be reckoned with. And it is fortunate that he was a member of the West Virginia House of Delegates when so much was at stake for half of America's population. Excuse me. Now we get serious. Now, therefore, on this day, August 26, 2023, the anniversary of women gaining the right to vote under the U.S. Constitution, it is fitting that Marlin Lane Rankin's actions and moral suasion of his peers be celebrated and his true name be remembered for posterity. For without him, West Virginia may not have ratified the 19th Amendment on March 10, 1920, and the long wait, then it was over 144 years, for women to gain the right to vote would have continued indefinitely. Given this day, proudly recognizing Delegate and Reverend Marlin Lane Rankin, alumnus of the West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and Blind, under my hand and the seal of the town of Romney, Beverly C. Cadle, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cadle. In the proclamation, she mentioned that we needed to remember him by his correct name. One of the reasons that we haven't celebrated this individual before is because we didn't really know who he was. In the research of Romney and the 19th Amendment, Ms. Smith found in the West Virginia Blue Book, which is a record of the delegates and meetings and sessions, this image that has this gentleman listed as George Lane Rankin. And in that, it says he attended the West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and the Blind in Romney. He's a native of Ravenswood, West Virginia. It tells more about him. I love the final sentence. While afflicted with blindness. Yes, this was 103 years ago, guys. We don't say, nobody's afflicted with blindness. While afflicted with blindness, he is a man of keen intellect and took an active interest in all important measures coming before the House. We know that our students can do anything that anybody else can do, right? Yes. Absolutely. And we have our students actually visited Senator Manchin just last spring and had a tour of the White House. And one of our students is probably going to end up in the White House eventually, correct? Yes. Absolutely. So in doing the research, this picture, this jumped out at Ms. Smith. And so she contacted a former teacher here and local historian, Dan Oates, whom you were probably familiar with. Mr. Oates did some digging, and he discovered a different name. He discovered the true name of Marlin Lane Rankin. He also has discovered what we think are some photos from 1884, when Mr. Rankin was just a boy and a student here. The picture on the right shows the full group picture from 1884. And on the left is the boy that we think is Mr. Rankin, but they weren't labeled. So we're taking a guess there. So we really appreciate the research of Mr. Oates and Ms. Smith in finding Mr. Rankin so that we can celebrate him. And to help honor him and to help remember his name correctly for the rest of his time and legacy, we are going to rename this room in the Brannon building, which is named after former Superintendent Selden Brannon, a blind member of the community. We're going to rename this room Marlin Lane Rankin Hall in his honor. And to commemorate that, our local artist and former teacher of our school, Miss Nancy Judd. Please stand up, Miss Nancy. Miss Judd has recreated Mr. Rankin's picture in a painting that we will hang to honor this, our hero alumnus, and to honor our school for raising an individual who was bold enough to speak on behalf of individuals with less than he. Okay, up next we have a message from Senator Shelley Moore Capito, and then we're going to have a performance by a local group called the Honeybees.
Hello everyone, this is Senator Shelley Moore Capito. I'm thrilled to be celebrating the ratification of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. I'm also incredibly happy to be honoring a hero of West Virginia, Marlin Lane Rankin. His story of overcoming adversity and his devotion to making West Virginia and America a more equal place is an inspiration for all of us. Through prayer, dedication, and a fiery spirit, he rose and fought for a right that I and women across America otherwise might not have today have without his support. I was so sorry to hear that his name has been misremembered for so long, but I am happy to see that we're finally setting the record straight. And I'm happy that you all have gathered in the aptly named Marlin Lane Rankin Hall to do just that. Today is my pleasure to celebrate the 19th Amendment and what it means for equality for women in America. I'm also grateful for Reverend Rankin and the legacy of never giving up that he left behind in that same fight. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and they deserve to be honored today. Thank you.
Next, we're going to invite the local group, the Honeybees, to sing.
We're not going to go up there if that's okay. Ken, we're actually going to be right down here. The Weird Sisters. Not from the Shakespeare play. I was a shy and lonely girl with the heavens in my eyes, and as I walked along the lane, I heard the echoes of her cry.
What a beautiful and appropriate song for the transition of our country and us as women and individuals. Thank you, honeybees, for that.
Thank you for asking.
We're going to step forward into the present for our closing and talk a little bit about geocaching. So geocaching is a real-world outdoor adventure that is happening all the time, all around the world. To play, participants use an app or a GPS device to navigate to cleverly hidden containers called geocaches. There are millions of geocaches in 190 countries waiting to be discovered. And there are probably some near you right now. In fact, I know for sure that there are. We have our first geocache located on our campus in Romney, and that is also honoring our alumnus, Marlin Lane Rankin. If you can find the location of the geocache, you will be rewarded with a surprise to keep, and you will also find that we have an inclusive geocache. Blind individuals can use a slate and stylus to record their names, as well as sighted individuals can use a pencil to record their names that they have located the geocache. Our geocache is just one of many in the town of Romney. There is an entire path that signifies the history and the significance of the town of Romney in the passing of the 19th Amendment. And I would encourage you all to take a little walk around town. You can download the geocache app. You can really get into it and buy a GPS. But there is a lot of history right here in Romney for us to explore. We don't need to go very far, kind of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. It's right in our backyard. One more thing that I want to encourage you is to register to vote. If you are 18 and you are here and you have not registered to vote, we have a table set up after we close today. You're welcome to speak to a representative who will help you get registered to vote so that you too can use your voice just like Marlin Lane Rankin in his time. In closing, I would like to thank each of you for attending. Thank you to Ms. Smith for driving this to celebrate our alumnus and a well-known member of our community. Thank you to Ms. Beverly Cadle, Mayor Cadle, for joining us and planning and supporting our school in everything that we do. Thank you to our school, the honeybees, our community, everyone who support our students to become all that Senator Manchin spoke of, strong, independent leaders in our world. We thank you all for coming. And if you're here in person, you can have a cookie. If you're on Facebook, I'm sorry. Thank you for joining us.
I really want to do that.